right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Subtle Asian Voices. My name is Daphne. I'm one of your hosts here on this channel. And today we're doing another episode in our career development series, this time featuring Dr. Rita Mukherjee. Rita is an assistant professor, at the Department of Women and Gender Studies at Iowa State. And we're so excited to have her on our channel. Rita, thank you so much for joining us. Really quick plug, if you haven't already, please go ahead and like and subscribe, and so that you can see us on our channel and don't miss any of our videos. So Rita, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, tell us more, tell us everything.
Yeah, hey Daphne, thank you so much for having me. I'm hyped to be here. Like she just said, my name is Dr. Rita Mukherjee. Don't forget that doctor, paid a lot of money for that title. I am an assistant teaching professor in the Women's and Gender Studies Department at Iowa State. My background is in literature from Florida State. And before that, I did my master's at Temple. And before that, I was studying drama at NYU, which seems like a lifetime ago. And yeah, today I'm here. I entered the job market and entered my professorial capacity under COVID-19. So I've had a little bit of an unusual beginning to my career. But it's also helped me learn a lot. It's helped me get in touch with what matters to me. And I'm so excited to share that with y'all today.
Wow, that's a lot. I can't wait to hear about that journey, girl. Tell us about it. So first things first, I guess, what made you want to enter what you're currently doing as an assistant professor?
Yeah, I think my whole life I was really taken with stories. And so when us Asian American kids are growing up, it's not like we can, just pull a whole bunch of books and texts and films that relate to our experience that look like us and give us a vantage point to hold on to. And so I think I was reading a lot as a child because I was looking for us. I was looking for our stories. I was looking for our people. And I didn't find us, but I kept reading anyway. And so I think what I discovered over time was that through the power of like stories, imagination, fantasy, I could envision a world wherein people that look like us were bosses or in charge or running shit or superheroes or super villains or whatever. I was so desperate to envision us as part of a literary tradition, part of a media tradition. And so when I was coming up, my media representation was probably like Apu from The Simpsons. Like that was probably it. And so, that's disheartening as a young girl, like when everybody else has Barbie and this and that and Ariel and all, Belle, these Disney and adjacent kind of heroines, it's really disheartening. And so I think literature was always a place I went to experiment, to imagine what could be. And so that's really how I got into literature as kind of like a field. And then just through trying different careers, trying different opportunities, more and more, I kept coming back to those stories, especially as now we're seeing more and more like Netflix series, Hulu streaming modeled off of novels. I'm like, hey, you guys, books are cool. Like, it could be
It's
a
about
thing.
time.
Yeah. So that's really where I'm at right now.
Gotcha. Thanks so much for sharing that. I mean, like, what did you think about, just a quick side, aside, what do you think about Aladdin and having Princess Jasmine represent you? I'm just curious.
Yeah. So, like, when I was little, I saw Jasmine and I was like, I feel like that could kind of be me. There were so many signifiers, though, to indicate to me that even though Agrabah wasn't a real place, even if it was not where my people came from. It was not me necessarily. And so, as much as I wanted to gravitate toward that kind of jasminified brownness, I think it was hard because I knew that really wasn't me. And people like recently someone asked me like, "Oh, when have you seen yourself in like literature and media?"
Mhm.
And I've had to say never.
Never.
And honestly, that's not me being like salty or bitter or anything like that, but the day that I see, in mainstream media like a really kind of ratchet, ragtag, but still brainy, heart of gold, brown girl coming through, then I'll be like, hello, yes, I identify
Yeah.
with that. But otherwise, like Jasmine was hard because it still felt like Jasmine, from the Aladdin story we know, she's so passive, right? And she's really not an actor very much. Like if I had a whole tiger right here with me, I'd
Mhm.
be getting some stuff done,
There you
you
go.
know. And so I think that's hard that so many of us grew up with iconography that was just close enough for us to relate to,
Mhm.
but also just far enough for us to be like, I'm not sure that that's me.
Yeah. I think there has to be a distinction made about that too, because they see us as like very passive at some points, as like women and then Asian American women too, that I feel like breaking those stereotypes is a journey, right? And we're currently on that.
Absolutely.
Thankfully, it's more
Absolutely.
and more. Yeah. So that's really exciting. So can you tell me what would you, what specifically, what would, oh, sorry, words. What specifically did you do to get into the profession that you are today?
Yeah, so when I was kind of like in that place, we've all been there, kind of like 2021, and it's like, well, my family's asking me what I'm going to do with my life, and I'd love to have an answer. I couldn't help but feel like I didn't really connect to the things my peers were connecting to. Like there wasn't a business I was passionate about. There wasn't necessarily a trade that I was really excited about. I just loved stories, and I've loved stories for so long. And especially now that like Netflix and everything's streaming, it's so much easier for us to have our roots for escapism. I wanted to enter that conversation and ask what stories are missing, right? What stories are maybe told a certain way that are really not quite that way at all. And I was just talking to my partner's mom about this the other day. Um, there are so many iteration of like the classic fairy tales, Grimm's fairy tales, what everyone calls them. There are so many in Chinese that predate those fairy tales,
Right.
and they're very similar, and you can find the common ground. But we don't teach them as classic Chinese fairy tales. We teach them as the Brothers Grimm, blah blah blah. Right? We have to Europeanize everything, and
Right.
I'm much more interested in like what are our ancestors' stories? Like what's been forgotten? What were the sort of like back and forth tales that our people used to tell? So I think that's what I became really invested in, just asking those questions. And then when I realized like, oh wait, all of literature is like pretty much about white people, like oh hell no. Like especially like as Chinese people, as Indian people, as Viet people, as Korean people, as Japanese people, as anyone from the Asian continent, our people have been recording stories and myths and legacies since well before the common era. So it's really hard when we're sort of shafted in the pantheon of like what gets counted as like canonized literature or classic literature. I think a lot of what our people have written is way more classic, but it's hard when someone has to attribute a story to, say, a South Asian origin or a Cambodian origin, right? That doesn't align with this notion of Europe as the center of all the greatest writing in the world. So, yeah, asking those big questions and being highly suspicious. That's how I got here.
I remember in Singapore, you were learning about these stories, right? And so I went to school in Asia. And then we always thought that we were always from European descent. I didn't until today when you told me, I was like, oh yeah, I heard that somewhere that they're very similar, but that was like much later on, way before. And so imagine being a student in Asia, learning about stories that might have come from your culture, and now learning that wait, you're right, it could have been from our specific culture, but then having that be credited to somebody else is kind of shocking. I didn't realize that. It's a very humbling realization to have. Um,
Definitely, definitely.
yeah. So what specifically led you to become a professor? So you said you wanted to step in and, broaden literature to represent Asian Americans and what that was actually like. So what brought you to specifically becoming a professor at Iowa State?
Yeah, so again, it was that craving for an interruption.
Mhm.
I just felt like there were these neat, clean categories. And even today, all my lit people can tell you, if you want to do literature, the boxes that they provide you with are so Eurocentric. They're so crusty, they're so antiquated. So, like, for someone like me, I exclusively study like maybe late 20th century, but 21st century on. I like living writers. I vibe with people who I can just call up right now and say, hey, I just read your book and I have some questions. You know, we create literature and literary study as this tradition of like just praising everything and sort of being like in awe of the genius. And I think that's really colonial. I think
Mhm.
that really is what people did in our respective countries to make us forget our legacy, to forget our aesthetic contributions and what we were doing way before any kind of colonial conquest. And so I think when I was riding that wave of interruption, I saw so many young people in college who were maybe not from a super strong socioeconomic background. I saw people who maybe didn't speak English as their first language. And I saw people who did not have the cards dealt in their favor to be successful. And that's when I knew I had to step in. When I see especially in like this is like super emotional and close to my heart, but when I see especially like dreamers, anybody involved with DACA who are here and putting in the work, um, when someone threatens to question that person's integrity or take away from that person's potential because of their past, I won't abide that, and I don't believe in that. And I think that something that's really toxic that's happened is people say, oh, we're all a country of immigrants. That's not true. Some of our parents came here by choice. Some of our parents fled here because they had no other option. Some of our parents wound up here because they had no recourse and they didn't have any intention of being here. And I think that rhetoric can really erase some of the exciting tapestry, especially for us Asian Americans. So I knew that with becoming a professor, if I got to that point, I would be able to reframe that conversation and say, yeah, no, this is not the height of literature. This is not the paradigm of whatever. I don't care what y'all have to say about
Mhm.
Shakespeare and the Romantic poets and blah, blah, blah. I don't have time for that. There are living folks with us right now who we can be commenting on. And so I think that seeing just like uh, homogeneous type of person, that really ticked me off. Like that really made me mad. And I felt like I had to step in at that point.
Gotcha. I mean, there's so much to be said about immigration and immigration to the US specifically. Like you were saying, everyone is here for a reason, whether they wanted to be here, we don't know. And we just always assume that it's like it's a choice. Sometimes it's not a choice, you know, and I'm glad
No.
you're getting the word out there. It's super important to realize. So would you mind sharing about your doctorate, specifically your doctorate journey, so your profession through its stages and how you got to where you are?
Yeah, so with kind of like a liberal arts type doctorate, you're gonna have the same basic components. So first things first, you gotta do your coursework, and usually that means getting kind of the bare bones components of the field, understanding the major conversations, and understanding what predominantly people in the field are talking about. So coursework is the first chunk. The second chunk is the preliminary exam, or comps they're called in some places, depends where you go. And so this is like a weird sadistic test of everything in your given field, like kind of ever. So for me, I chose post-colonial literature. I wanted to study anywhere that had been colonized, and so I just had to read like hundreds and hundreds of books on end. While that sounds objectively terrifying, you do pick your area and you do pick your specialties. So, like, for example, I study like women's literature, I study food, I study sex. And so my book list was taking into account texts that have that in mind specifically, not just like everything written ever. So that's kind of the second step. And then in the third step, you're in this sort of very simultaneously like liberating place because you kind of write about whatever you want because you're selling your dissertation, but it's also a terrifying place because if you don't know your exact idea, or if you have several ideas, or if you like your idea but you're not sure if someone else is going to like it, you're kind of in this place where you tease out what the idea is going to look like. In the best case scenario, you have like a committee, mentors, other people to help you through that. um, and then you start writing, and you got to write and write and write. My recommendation is always, to anyone, doesn't matter if you're social sciences, STEM, whatever, my recommendation is always 20 minutes a day. And it's annoying and it's a pain in the ass and it hurts, but once you set that timer down, you kind of get that going. It's like anything else, right? 21 days makes a habit. It's like anything else. Once you get yourself in that habit of like, now is a time where I'm going to sit down and write, as much as it's like objectively terrifying to be told, like, you have to write a dissertation, it's feasible. And there are so many like really, really interesting BIPOC and AAPI like groups that are specifically about women writers or people writing from different marginalized groups. And so as you're writing your dissertation, there are support systems on the way. Once you're done, you kind of get that document together and you submit that to your committee. You
Right.
defend it, and hopefully then that's it.
That sounds like quite the journey. How long was your dissertation in terms of like pages? I'm a little terrified.
It wasn't very long. It wasn't a very long dissertation. I think it was about 115 pages, which is very short for a
Wow.
dissertation. I have friends like well into 200, 300 pages. I'm just like, I'm very concise.
There you go. There you go. Concise, you're well spoken. And then I'm sure defending your dissertation, what was that like?
It was hard because on the one hand, it's questions that you kind of probably know the answers to. On the other hand, it's really hard because when you go up for your defense, you're in a room with your committee that you yourself have assembled. So nobody, well, in best faith, nobody in there is trying to get you or trick you or ruin your life. They just really want to give you the opportunity to like sparkle. And so that's what the defense is. And I think like, anytime that there's an opportunity to come forward before people you really love and respect and share your work, like you want to do the razzle dazzle and sparkle and all that. So it's tough, but there's plenty of people to help you out along the way, and you have like a lot of time to prepare.
That's awesome. I mean, the idea of a dissertation freaks me out because I don't write. Which is
Yeah,
why I
it
have
like
a clinical doctorate.
now it grosses me out. Now I'm like, ew, like, ugh. I'm like, you want me to write how many pages? No, I don't think I can do that.
Well, let's go on with that course then. So would you mind describing your day-to-day role? If you're not writing, then what are you doing in its stead? And tell us about that.
Yeah. So actually, do you mind if I pause for a second?
Oh, of course.
I just
Sure.
need to check something in my other room. I'll be right back.
Pausing. All right. So Rita, would you mind describing to us your day-to-day responsibilities and what that's like for you in Iowa State?
Yeah, so right now we're in a little bit of a strange time with COVID-19 and social distancing and kind of teaching remotely. So right now, until I see numbers and vaccination distribution, like until I see those numbers in a place where I like both of them, I'm not going to teach in person. I'm not willing to take that risk. I have family members, loved ones, a lot of people in my life who are immunocompromised, and I know how hard it is right now. We have so many Kappa sisters like right working in healthcare, and like my heart goes out to them. I think they all deserve like double, triple raises. But right now, my duties are a little bit different. So basically, what I do is I get up, I like to get on Canvas right away, kind of check email and see what everybody's up to. I usually then go in with my like email and just make sure I don't have any like surprise appointments or meetings or anything like that. I try to be involved with a lot of committees on campus. So I usually have like a couple meetings during the work week. I like to grade on Canvas, which like, I don't know about y'all, but we have like Blackboard in the day, and Canvas is like so much nicer and easier to like move through and grade. Sometimes I can even do it on my phone. And so I'll grade for a little bit. With not being in person, I have tried to take on some like different skill sets to connect with my students. So one of those has been I made a TikTok.
Nice.
It's like it's so it's like so sad because like I'm not a tech person. I did not grow up like in the social media like age. I'm like just that cusp millennial where it was like just a little bit past me. So I'm like, oh gosh, okay. But I know that when people are online and they're studying and they've had 3 classes, sometimes like 60 seconds is the most you can have, right? Attention for. So I've been getting on TikTok and been like, okay, let's talk about some of these questions on here. So sometimes I'll film some of those and I always write like, be kind to my students because like the idea of like Gen Z people just like dragging me on the internet, it's like too much to bear. Like I can't. But I'll do that. I'll grade. Usually I'll have office hours with some students. So sometimes it's just questions like regular stuff, kind of, oh, I had trouble with this, can you help me understand this? Other times it's students that like are my advisees. So like right now I have a student, Antonio, who just finished his applications to doctoral programs, and so like I'm so like I'm so like so hype and excited because he just got into his first PhD program. And so I'm like, woo, I'm like so hype. And it's really great to see like people who listen to me and really like what I have to say. It's really cool to see them taking that ideology forward and wanting to go do something else. I advise a couple of student groups on campus too. One of them is brand new. It doesn't even exist yet. So this is kind of like Subtle Asian Voices exclusive. But it's going to be called like Socialize with Pride. It's a queer student org. It's social. And it's basically not trying to do like, I feel like a lot of queer students on campus right now have been like, we need to do like activism all the time. And like, I mean, it's just as fine to just like hang out with people in your same kind of interest groups or in common areas, and it's fine to just vibe.
Mhm.
And so I feel like that's what they're trying to do. Like there's so many times that in college or whatever, just hanging out, whether it was with Kappa sisters or just in general with other groups, like there were so many times that we just had like a little social time. And I feel like it's hard with people in college right now because they don't have that luxury, they don't have that same facility with networking. So yeah, like I would say grading stuff, meeting with students, and advising. That's my day to day.
Gotcha. And then it sounds like you have a lot going on too. So when you do teach, would you mind talking to us a little bit about your classes and what that's like?
Yeah, totally. So right now I'm teaching a class called International Perspectives on Women and Gender, which I love. And trust and believe, we do heavy Asian emphasis in there. We also do a lot of emphasis on our North African, Middle Eastern sisters. It's really important to me, especially because I'm in Iowa. You know, I'm out here in the sticks, and some of the young folks here that I encounter have never met a me, and it's new. And if they come to us with good faith and they come to us with an open mind, I want to foster that. And I always want to make sure they understand. So I think one of the most misunderstood topics today is probably the situation of women in North Africa and the Middle East, and just like kind of what's up with Muslim women and stuff like that. So I'm teaching a lot about that. I definitely teach a lot about Taiwan and how Taiwanese women have actually been like the forerunners of a queer movement decades before women in America. A lot of people don't know that.
Good
And
to
yeah, Taiwan is a place that I think is like so exceptional and so interesting, so unique. And I try to like implement a lot of teachings from like especially like Taiwanese queer women's movements in that class. I'm also teaching right now a class that's on introduction to lesbian studies, and this is the first time I'm teaching that class, which is really fun. And so something that I'm doing is I'm myth busting. I'm going through with a lot of this curriculum. I'm saying like, hey, I bet you heard about this, but did you know about this? So like, for example, one thing that I really want the students to understand is that like, this idea of like witches and like harlots and whatever, like right in the colonial era, like a lot of the times I was just like a shorthand for like that girl is gay. And so like we're going back through and we're looking through like all the times that women who were like midwives or scientists or whatever have been like accused of like being a witch or whatever. So that like that's kind of a fun class because we're unpacking a lot of like lies in history. And then at ISU, we do half semester courses. And so coming up in like, I guess like 2 weeks here, I'm going to have a half semester course that's going to be Intro to Women and Gender Studies. And that's like your perfect primer for, doesn't matter what major you are, doesn't matter what your interests or your political leanings are. That's going to give you your primer on like, what is feminism? What is the feminist movement? Why does it matter to you? I'm not gonna lie, I have a lot of fun with that class. I've taught it a whole bunch of times, and I like it because it kind of attracts like first years, sophomores, juniors, seniors, doesn't matter. We get everybody in there.
I love those class topics. I would be right up all in that curriculum.
Yeah.
Interesting, especially nowadays when we're at such a pivotal time in history where like all of this is coming out into the open, and debunking historic lies is like the number one thing you don't even realize are lies, And I would love actually to take a look at your curriculum at some point if you wouldn't mind. That'd be super
Yeah,
cool.
girl, I got you. I'll send you all the syllabi.
That'd be great. Send it over. So along the lines of your career journey, then could you tell me about, like our parents are very closely tied to us, especially in Asian American culture. We value their opinion a lot. Would you mind telling us what that interaction was like with your parents? How did they feel about you entering this field?
Yeah, so I've been an artist my whole life. My parents actually got me into ballet, which got me into theater, which got me into all the things I'm into now. And so I feel like as much as they hoped that might be just like a proclivity, I think my parents always knew I wasn't going to be that like business, STEM, Indian, Biddy. Like, I remember going to NYU and seeing all of the Indian girls at Stern and seeing all of them at the business school and just feeling like, wow, like all my people are in this school and I'm over here in this school. And even still, like in the field, I never ever see Indian American women. I never see them. And I hope that this will be like sort of a weird passing moment. I think when I was younger and I was interested in like queer studies and feminism and stuff like that, I think my parents' fear was always that not so much that like they didn't believe what I was saying. I think they were frightened that what I was saying would get me in trouble. And I think for a lot of us from immigrant like parents and from, older generations, there were very dire repercussions for speaking out on certain things. We're not talking about, oh, you get a nasty letter in the mail. Like we're talking about life and death. And I think that there are so many elders who spoke out and suffered such dire consequences that like our parents and stuff, they're not wrong to be frightened and to have those fears. I think once my parents saw that I was making my otherness, my brownness, my womanness, my queerness, I think once they saw that was my brand and that's who I was, I think they felt a little bit happier and safer because they just didn't want me to be hurt or attacked for who I am. Now, I'm not going to lie and say that it's their favorite thing to talk about in the household. My partner is like a cis man, and they don't really have to interrogate a lot of that part of my life. But when I launched my magazine recently, Honey Literary, and they saw that it's like sex positive and BIPOC and Asian American women and kicking ass and blah blah blah, I feel like they were genuinely happy. They read the issue, which was like it's like hard for me because I'm the sex editor also, and so I'm like, oh god, like my parents are gonna read this, like crazy stories, and like ooh, and like sometimes I'll be at a reading or I'll be online doing a reading and I'll be like talking about something and I'm like, okay, now I'm gonna read a story about like my like boobs and like sorry mom. Like,
The
I,
apologies.
that's it. That's all I have. That's all I have to offer her. But I
Yeah.
feel like as I've gotten older, they've been able to see that it's not about making a statement or acting out for attention. I think they've really been able to see how much we are in a critical point of change socially. And as much as like it was painful for all of us, I think the Trump administration really helped because it laid bare how dire those belief systems were from one joint to the next. And I think my parents saw in that moment, like, we don't gel with that. Like, what is that? No. Like, my gay kid can go say whatever she wants. And so I feel like that's really a recent development in our relationship, is like them kind of seeing me for who I am and seeing my work for what it is and being on board and accepting. I can't say it was instant. I can't say it was easy, but it happened, and it's really cool now. Like, I'm 31 and it feels good to like share what I'm doing with my mom and stuff like that.
That is quite the journey, because I feel like with Asian American parents especially, they have a certain idea and like what the culture is, and that's what it is, right? Step outside of it and they're like, oh, a lot of the time that's a lot of the knee-jerk reactions that we get. And I'm sure like this is not an easy conversation for you to have with your parents,
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I feel like a lot in especially in Asian cultures, it's hard to be as outspoken as we are as Americans.
Yes.
Like, that needs to be more of that happening. We
Yeah.
need to be able to have these conversations with that. Um, so would you mind, along those lines, do you have any advice about talking to your parents about difficult conversations the way you did? Because that's super important, I feel.
Yeah, I do. So one of the biggest things that I can say from like now having this time reflecting, moving forward, and then, every so often I'm thinking of like one of my best students right now at Iowa State who wrote to me a couple years ago and was like, just subject line like problematic family. And I was like, oh girl, what is this? And so I opened it up, and basically what she was writing to me about was she was saying, I'm going home for the holidays. I'm scared and I'm nervous and I'm worried because I don't think my family accepts what it is that I'm doing at college. And I feel like I don't know how to stick up for myself. And so I think one of the first places we can begin in these really hard conversations is by saying to our guardians, to our parents, to our loved ones, you raised me to be blank and blank and blank. So for me, my parents raised me to be brave, to be bold, and to stand up for what's right, even if it doesn't affect me personally. So when I think about what it means, right, to be an ally, or if we're, in solidarity with Black Lives Matter, or if we're speaking up for our elders who are being so abused in this cultural moment, I think one of the first places to start is to say to our loved ones, you raised me with these values. I believe in standing up for what's right, for helping people who need my help, and for speaking up when maybe no one else is going to speak up. I think that's the first place we got to start, because that's the common ground, right? It's not about a debate or generations or whatever. It's simply, I love you, I'm grateful to you, and I'm going to uphold what it is you instilled in me. And I think that there are some people who will listen to that and be really receptive and say, like, okay, yeah, I'm starting to hear that. And there's some people who that's not going to be enough. And so I think, like, you gotta choose your battles, right? And so I know with like a lot of people in my life, there's had to be a window of time for safety and healing. um your personal health always comes first. So if you feel like even a blood family member, for example, is starting to encroach on your well-being, you got to put some barriers down. You got to be able to say, I'm doing this. You're not allowing me to do this right now. And so until we can get to that point, I need to take a step back. I think that one of the greatest things we can do also, especially with older generations, is show our admiration and show the things that they've done that are super feminist and like progressive. So it's really funny because I'm always talking with Christina, one of my girlfriends on Honey Literary. I'm always talking with Dorothy, my co-founder of Honey. We're always talking about how our moms are so hardcore feminists, and they just like, did shit that women were not doing at the time. And of course, like, I think none of our moms would necessarily like come into and be like, hello, it's me, a feminist. That's not really right. Like that's not the
Imagine
conversation.
that.
Yeah, that's not the conversation, and that's not the verbiage and vernacular that they were using. And so I don't think we should necessarily push that onto them, but I think when we can reveal to them, like, remember when you taught me XYZ, that's when I learned this lesson. It can be exciting, I think, for them to realize, like, oh wait, I was part of this social movement all along. I'm thinking of so many people's grandmothers and elders. I'm thinking of my sister Jamie's Lola. I'm thinking of so many people who just broke norms and changed expectations, like way before the public eye was on them, way before social media was waiting to validate them, right? I think that coming from a place of love and coming from a place of mutual understanding is always the best first step.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's super important. We always often forget because we think we're always against people sometimes. That's and personally like experience of that hasn't always been the best way. Not saying it's
Yeah.
been for debate, but as of right now, when you're trying to speak to your parents who really value respect, like I feel like Asian Americans and Asian culture in general, we really value respecting your elders and what they've done for you. That's always a good first invitation. So thank you for that. Um, so let's go ahead and move on. So would you mind telling us about a time in your career where maybe you struggled the most and maybe have wanted to quit, and how did you overcome that?
So my doctoral program was really strange in that I loved my friends and I loved my advisor and I loved so many things about it. But in coming from New York and coming from a different kind of like hustle and style of program, people around me were really, really upset by my presence. And I say presence because there are some people to this day who like truly and deeply, profoundly have a problem with me, or were upset by me, who I've never met or spoken to. And I think that tells us a couple things. I think it tells us, one, that no matter what you do, no matter who you are, what grade of a job you do, there could be someone who's going to find a problem no matter what. And there came a point, there was kind of a critical mass in my doctoral program where all of these people sort of rose up against me and went to my department and were like, this girl is winning everything and she is always favored for this, that, and the third, and it's unfair and she's a bully and blah, 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 blah. And I was kind of like, initially, I was kind of like, what? That's like straight up confusing. And then another tone, I was kind of flattered because I was like, I have so many hobbies and I like think about so many people like across like the world, but y'all are like going to sleep thinking about me. Like that's kind of wild. But they eventually, what they did was they created kind of like a small organization. They basically tried to like uh ruin my credibility and talk about my accomplishments. And for some reason, not for some reason, they attacked my personal appearance a lot. They talked about my fingernails a lot, which like they're not very long right now, but they're
Beautiful.
usually like They're usually pretty cute and like nice, and like my nails are real, unlike like a lot of things. And they were just like a very, I think, uncomfortable group of white people who had never met someone like me and were very disconcerted by someone who was a person of color, was queer, was willing to state her mind, was willing to criticize others. And it was it was so shocking to me that other people would expend effort and time doing that. Like, I have so many hobbies and I like watch so many shows. I'm like, if I have free time, like, y'all are not getting it at all. Like, I have 2 cats. I'm like, y'all not getting it. But when I started to realize that there were really these people who, for whatever reason, were just angry that I existed, I was reminded once again that, like, we are not, no matter how many degrees, no matter how many accolades, awards, cuckoo, cuckoo, this, that, you're not above racism. You're not above being critiqued by people who simply are not okay with someone like you doing what you're doing. And so I took some time and I consulted with different sources. I thought about taking legal action. And then I just had to take a step back and realize, like, ask the big question, like, do I care? Like the law, and like we have so many people in our community in law, like the law takes so long. And I was like, I don't know if in 6 months I'm gonna care about this. And I decided I didn't. Um, that was one of the hardest times for me. It was very painful. I felt very alone. In my program, I had one other Asian American cohort member, Dorothy Chan. She's one of my best friends. Shout out to Dorothy. But without her and other very close friends I had, I was kind of like, okay, like, point taken. Maybe this isn't for me. But I think what I really took from that experience was that, why would people be talking? Why would they be so upset? Why would they be so incensed if they weren't threatened? If they weren't deeply, deeply disconcerted by what I was doing. So all that reminded me to do is put my head back down and keep hustling. I just kept writing. I just kept trying to do what I was trying to do. And now I'm here. And every time, while I don't get a ton of Asian American folks in Iowa, whenever I have folks of color, anybody who's marginalized, people with disabilities, people from other countries, people who have had negative experiences because of their gender, their orientation, I always try to remind them, like, the the biggest, the greatest response to all that criticism is, I'm still here and I'm doing me.
Hi.
Hello. you
Oh,
know and so I think that's real, and I've seen a lot of people in our field like fall to that, and I don't blame them at all. I want to signal, like, kind of the next chapter. Like, I want my status as a professor to signal, like, the gates are open, like, shit's about to get real, and people are going to start looking like me and you, and they're going to have to deal with it.
exactly. And I mean, with the growing population of diversity that's happening in the States, like this is not going to go away ever. No matter what
Mm-mm.
we do, now that we have a base here. And the idea is that obviously to bridge these gaps, right, and educate them. But at first, like being open to that conversation is super important. And even being able to like openly say that is a thing that we have to be comfortable doing. And
Totally.
that's outrageous. I mean, like doing that in this day and age, you think in like the 20th century, it would be not as blatant. But I mean, girl, you came through, you are fighting it, and look at you, a successful professor at ISU.
Thank
Very
you.
exciting. That was an insane career journey, girl. Thank you so much. That was a lot to take in and a lot that I learned today, especially. But we have a couple of questions that I got from a couple of audience members, if you don't mind.
Yeah, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, so this is a great career journey. I mean, people want to know about specifically how you interact with students in your classroom, considering, you know, as an Asian American and an ISU of all places, might not be the most diverse place. So in terms of diversity, would you mind talking about gender diversity in your classes? I know like gender identity isn't as simple as male and female, but do you think, would you do an outreach kind of out of your way to kind of broaden your diversity in your classes? What is that like for your student body?
Yeah, so because a lot of the classes I teach are things like intro to lesbian studies or intro to queer theory, I have a very self-selecting group. And so ever since I joined faculty here at Iowa State, I've had non-binary people, I've had trans people, I've had cis women, cis men, I've had people who are like sort of at a crucial tipping point in terms of their gender identity, and it's been really exciting. I will say that I do play, I guess like bad cop would be the best term. So like, especially when I'm in person, like first day is always going to be very like, you will abide by these, and it's very like, it's very in your face, very loud. Because the reality is, and actually like, you know, you have the you have the added insight because I've spent time with you in life, but I'm 4'11", in case nobody ever met me. So like as a very petite younger professor, it's hard to establish your authority. And if you go in smiles and giggles, sometimes people will walk all over you, and that can be really scary. So I go in a little bit like hard guns blazing, not to scare anybody off necessarily, but just to let everybody know, like, you know, I might be itty bitty tiny, but like, we're not coming here to play games. We're not messing around. And so I think like setting that first day precedent is like really big for me. And then over time, I think my students love when they start to see me be a little bit silly or share a story or whatever. And now I have my TikTok. They see me like being a little bit more of a person. So yeah, I think like in establishing that kind of like teacher persona, I definitely go more the like strict, hard, like by the book route. Um, Even if that means maybe like taking it back a couple degrees later, I'd rather start really extra and tone it down rather than start super chill. And like I don't have that luxury. A lot of my like white cis het guy friends, like people love them, and they in their reviews it's always like, oh, he's so chill, he's so relatable, people bob. I'm not relatable, I'm not, and I'm okay with that, okay? So it is what it is.
Yeah, I'm sure students love that though. They love, with professors still like first used to scare me, and then you get to know them. You're like, wait a second, that's not really you. That's, I think that to me is the most interesting progression. But that's so cool that your students do come out to you, get to know the real you. I mean, TikTok, for goodness sake, that's like the coolest professor ever. If I had a professor, right?
I'm trying. I'm trying.
Link your TikTok down there to produce some good info. Is it on public?
Yeah. No. Hit me up. It's at Dr. Mukherjee says.
Cool. We'll put that in the link down below. And then also, if you guys didn't already know, Rita and I know each other from our sorority days back in Kappa Phi Lambda. Shout out to that. That's how I got to know her. And then now we get to do this awesome interview. So thanks for that. Good to know though. So another question for you. What was the most surprising question a student asked in class?
Oh man. Okay, do you want like a substantive question or do you want like an objectively silly question?
Whatever you would define as surprising.
Okay, so like a question I found surprising in class was when I was in my PhD still and I was TAing for my major professor. So she had a big old class, like 100, 200 people. It was in a theater. You know how it goes.
Mm-hmm.
So like she would begin with a quiz a lot of time, right? And one of the students came up and came over to me and was sort of like bending down. And so I was like, okay, I'm ready to receive the question. And the question was, is it okay if I leave to go change my pad?
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, To this day, I'm kind of like, and I think her concern was she was worried about her quiz and she didn't want to seem like it was like she was cheating or some shit like that. I don't know, but the amount of times that, and I say that because the amount of times that students have told me about their like bodily fluids, movements, different things, like I can't count. And there's so many, like that one is like a chill one. I've had so many students be like, hey, I can't come to class today. Here's what's happening with me. And I'm like, I did not need to know any
I am
part of
so
that.
curious.
Like it's wild, and I'm not, and we're all human, right? We all have our things, but like in my, like, okay, so real talk from professor to everybody else, if you have like a health thing, just be like, I have a health thing going on right now, I'm gonna let you know when it's resolved and I'm gonna get back on my things. When I've had a student be like, I've had explosive diarrhea since 4 in the morning, I'm like, sir,
Oh, that's great.
sir, I'm like, honey, I'm like, first of all, you need to hydrate because I'm worried about you at this point.
There you go.
Being like, I can't come to class today because here's what's going on. I'm like, okay, don't worry about class. Worry about getting those fluids back up in your body because I'm worried. You'd be amazed the number of times people just want to tell me about their bodily fluids.
I love that your students are so open with you about that.
They're too open. Too open.
Dude, I can't tell you how many of my patients are just like telling me things and I'm like,
and you're like, I'm a PT, but it doesn't mean I'm here for all of your health issues.
I know, it's like I'm here one-on-one with y'all for the hour, but dang, that's a lot to unload. No pun intended, right?
No pun.
Oh my gosh. Okay, wait, how about question in class when you were teaching? What was the most surprising question for you as a professor to a student?
Oh, so like one time we were talking about symbolism because I was still in my doctoral program, so I was teaching literature, and we're talking about symbolism. And so like, like phallic symbolism is like, right, penis-like. And so I said something about phallic symbolism or something about yonic symbolism. I think I said phallic symbolism. And this one, and I will say dude, because he was a dude and he was white, he raised his hand and he said, what does phallic mean? And I was like, oh, phallic refers to something that resembles a penis. And he like burst out. It's like a 3,000 level literature class. He like burst out laughing. And like I had a couple what I call repeat offenders, like people who have taken class with me before who I like know. And I had a couple of them like toward the back, and they were all like these girls and these femmes who were like, are you laughing because she said penis? Like they were all like shocked. Like everyone in the room besides this dude was just like, and it was so much. And I just went, and he was like, ha ha ha. And I just like listened to him, and then I went, anyway, and I just had to keep moving on because I really don't expect that from college students. Like I think of people 18 up being like pretty comfortable with like words like penis. So when someone is like, ooh, you said penis, I'm like, baby, I have nothing for you. Okay, moving on.
Can't teach you that. Next.
Yeah.
Dang. Yeah, I would say that's a very interesting reaction at 3,000 level class, because you would think, or 300 level classes, you would think like, by then you would be comfortable speaking about this stuff, especially
I should hope so.
Department. Yeah. Well, at least you have a story out of that. So
There's the story.
oh man. So in terms of definition too, what does women's study actually mean when you're teaching this to your students? And then in terms of male representation, how have males viewed this topic in your class?
Yeah, so our program title in Iowa State is Women's and Gender Studies. And like a lot of people have changed that term throughout time. So some places are still just women's studies, some are women's and gender studies, some are women's gender and sexuality studies. And I think that women's and gender or women's gender and sexuality is probably the best go around of that. women's studies, like as a department, kind of comes out of like, you know, the second wave when people were really excited about like suffrage and potentially define. So like suffrage was the first wave, and then people were really excited about like defying women's gender norms in the second wave. But the problem is that if we're only talking about defining gender norms for women, we're leaving out a lot of other people. So I'm always more of a fan of saying like women's gender and sexuality studies, but my program is women's and gender. I get a lot of male students, cis males, trans males. I get non-binary people. Um, I will say I don't get a ton of people who are like maybe male identifying and looking to like pick a fight with me. I'm not going to say that doesn't happen. It happens all the time in the field. A lot of colleagues and close friends of mine have horror stories. But as far as like women's studies, I think that that term can be a little bit intimidating sometimes if you're not sure what it means. But basically, all it's trying to signal is that women's studies as a field and as a discipline emerged so many centuries after people had been studying men and commenting on men and remarking on men that it is warranted in its own right. I always prefer gender studies because I like to study like just everybody all the time ever. And even like my first fall here, one of my students at Trinity was teaching me about some new terminology like pocket gender. So, pocket gender might be a gender that is not formally recognized yet, doesn't necessarily look a certain way or ascribe to a certain set of norms, but is still kind of like a subculture in and of itself with its own norms. So, like pocket gender. So, like, I'm learning too, and I love that. So I think with women's studies, like as much as and I think this happens with feminism too, people are like, ugh, feminism, gross, when they don't realize like all it means is just like, let's treat everybody equal.
Fair. I
Yeah.
think people had this idea of like women in gender studies, and what it actually means is like feminism, activism, like let's like speak out against all the things, but then it means
Yeah.
learning, you know, and that's what's going to end up closing a lot of these gaps, hopefully. And as you continue to teach your students, I'm hoping that they'll be having a more open mind and open mindset discussion, because that's the bottom line, right? You want to get the conversation started. Awesome. So we're going to wrap up this wonderful interview with Rita. That's amazing. I learned so much today. I love hearing about your journey, girl. This is great. Do you have any final tips or advice to people who want to enter your field, or people who want to do something that you're doing or similar to that?
For starters, always get in contact with me. I'm going to give Daphne all my handles and informations. And so at Rita Mukherjee is my Twitter. And so that's the easiest way to connect with me. If you have questions and stuff like that, just hit me up. I'm you know, Stephanie, I'm not scary. I'm pretty regular. But please don't hesitate. Like, I'm always excited to welcome new people into the field. If you have a crazy, weird idea, go for it. I'm always happy to enable it. And just thanks again to Subtle Asian Voices for having me on here and making space for this conversation.
Yeah, we love you. Thank you, Rita, so much for taking the time, because I know it's like your personal free time for sure. You want to play with your cats and rest and do all that stuff. So trying to use that with us and teaching us about your field and what you do. So Rita, we're going to link all your stuff down below, and then including to your magazine, because I think that would be great to learn about more of what you're doing there. Any last shout outs and plugs that you'd like to kind of put out before we kind of wrap up?
No, just like the regular, you know, like Black Lives Matter, Asian American lives are lit, protect our Asian elders, and let's all just come together as a community and let's rebuild some shit, make it happen.
Love that. Thank you so much, Rita. And again,
thank you.
if y'all haven't hit that like button or subscribe, do it now, because you don't want to miss any more of these interviews, because Rita is amazing, obviously, and we're going to have so many more to come. Thanks again so much, guys. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend and take care. If you need anything, leave a comment down below. Love y'all. Bye.
Bye.